I recently started watching the Just Pearly Things YouTube channel, and I've been enjoying some of the content, some of it more than others. But a section of the content I really enjoyed was the series of interviews Pearl has done into the British family court system. I found that very interesting. I mean, I'm hoping to become a lawyer, I'm studying law at the moment, and I'm always interested by the opinions of people about the judiciary and lawyers in general who aren't from a legal background and aren't formally legally qualified. Also, I do have some sympathy for men who go through the judiciary, especially the family court system. Some of the topics that got brought up during the interviews interested me because as I'm studying law, I know quite a lot about how the law works. And a lot of it was quite interesting, especially some of the criticisms of lawyers in general and things that apparently go on in the family court. Something that was brought up in the interviews is that apparently solicitors in the family court are taking both parties in a given case. This I'd find quite concerning because solicitors and barristers as well aren't allowed to do this. There are a few exceptions, but you're not allowed to take both parties in a given dispute or deal, if you're a corporate lawyer or whatever it is, because it gives you a conflict of interest. And this was brought up, that solicitors seem to have a conflict of interest when dealing with men. And if it is the case that solicitors are taking both parties to a case, then I can certainly understand why they would have a conflict of interest. But the good thing is, because lawyers are highly regulated professionals like doctors, like nurses, and they have a regulatory body that regulates their professional practice. Not only that, persons, clients of lawyers, and anyone in the public can make complaints about those lawyers. So if it is the case that it's a common practice within the family court for solicitors to take both parties to a case, then that would be grounds to make a complaint to the solicitor's regulatory authority. It's important to note that there are some circumstances where it can be acceptable for solicitors to take both parties to a case. Normally, what has to be done by the law firm, if this is the case, the solicitors working for each party, representing, advising each party, must be separated either by a physical wall or put on separate floors. And also, there must be something done to make sure that those parties are not, or the lawyers representing those parties are not meeting each other, are not talking to each other, cannot see what the other lawyers are up to. So, generally, within the legal industry, it's not really that common for solicitors, especially law firms, to take on both parties in a given case, because it's to prevent there from being a conflict of interest. The steps that have to be taken can be quite excessive. So I'm not sure whether I would believe that this is a common practice within the family court system. I quite frankly don't know, but if it is, and if this has happened to you, then I would seriously suggest making a complaint. I'll leave the links on who you can complain to in the description. Another thing that came up that interested me is the claim that barristers are telling people to admit to domestic abuse if they're accused of it. This I'm not sure whether I believe or not, because barristers cannot knowingly mislead the court. So in the criminal context, if a barrister is representing someone who's accused of robbery, for example, and they confess to the barrister that they did commit that robbery, but they want to plead not guilty, then the barrister can't represent them because they'd be knowingly misleading the court. So the barrister will pass them on to another colleague. Telling someone to confess to something that they haven't done would probably amount to certainly knowingly misleading the court. So I'm sceptical to what extent this happens. If it happens, then the person it happens to should be making a complaint to the UK Bar Association or other professional bodies that regulate lawyers in your country. It becomes quite interesting because it was made unclear in the video or the interview whether the barristers are advising people to admit to domestic abuse to the court directly, or whether they were suggesting they confess or admit to it to Cathcas. I mean, even if it's to Cathcas, I would still think that encouraging a client or advising a client to admit to something they hadn't done, even if it was to Cathcas, would probably still amount to a breach of their professional duties. So it may be a breach, it may not be, but it's certainly a grey area that barristers shouldn't, in my opinion, be practicing in, because you shouldn't be advising people to confess to something they haven't done. The issue of money is perhaps where I think this issue has been distorted, because in one of the interviews, the person being interviewed said that barristers tell people it would be cheaper not to do it, to challenge a non-molestation order, and that's true, it would be, but that isn't the same thing as a barrister advising you not to challenge it. It might be the case that lots of men, because they can't access legal aid, have to make that decision to not contest a non-molestation order because they can't access legal aid. And I would certainly agree with most people, or most lawyers, that the legal aid budget needs to be increased and expanded to what it used to be pre-austerity, because during austerity, when David Cameron was Prime Minister, what happened was the legal aid budget got cut massively. So this has ramifications in the criminal sector. It also has ramifications in the family sector as well. But that is something that would be an easy solution to this problem, if it is the case that this is a problem. Another thing that got brought up in the interviews was the law won't change around family courts. And I think this is quite a negative attitude. It's not going to be easily changed. The law is very, very difficult to change. And I do understand the argument that groups like Women's Aid and other non-government organisations do have a lot of influence with the government. But it is possible for Fathers for Justice and other groups that represent men and support men going through this problem to lobby the government successfully. Lobbying the government successfully will take time, it will be extremely difficult, and it will take lots of resources. But it is possible to change the law. The best strategy probably would be to change certain bits of the law that are uncontroversial and keep going from there. Change the law an inch at a time. I mean, if it is the case that solicitors are acting in a way in family court that would go against their professional practices, more people reporting that and being aware of who to report it to would certainly have a positive impact, because the more solicitors that are either struck off or penalised for breaching professional practice in family court because it's more financially expedient, the less will do it. And if that were to happen, if it is the case that solicitors in the family court are behaving in a way that's very unprofessional, stopping solicitors from behaving in this way is a good step in the right direction. And even lobbying for an increase in the legal aid budget to what it was before 2010 would be a step in the right direction, because that would mean, hopefully, that more men could access legal representation who couldn't reasonably pay for it themselves. Another thing that came up in the interviews was the allegation or the claim that solicitors are taking cases and doing nothing with them. The little work experience I have is mainly in the corporate sector, and normally in the corporate sector what happens is clients will be given a breakdown of costs and what's been done and how long it's taken in the invoice. I'm not sure whether this happens in the family court, but it is something you should ask for if you're seeking legal advice, for a breakdown of costs and what they've done. If it does seem to you that your lawyer has just taken money off you to take the case and advise them and they haven't done anything, then what needs to happen is you need to make a complaint to the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, because lawyers aren't allowed to just take money and do nothing with it, because it's an incredibly unprofessional practice. If you think that solicitors are doing that, then make a complaint. Making a complaint is a productive thing for you to do. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope this video helps. And if you've got any comments, questions, leave them below. And if you would like help public speaking, please check out my YouTube content first. And if you still think you need help with public speaking, please get in touch with me. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.